Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Last week's conference, The Road Out of Lockdown, indicated for most hoteliers that most of them believe most hotels will only get back to 50% occupancy by the year end. So Abigail, I thought we'd start with you. Is that enough to really kick off full services again? Or is it going to be a much more gradual reply?
I believe at whatever percentage of occupancy, we would still need to provide a level of food and beverage services, just because it would be something that's expected from the guest, as well as still being able to provide them a level of service that they would expect in a hotel. And I think based on a, say, max 50% occupancy, even a few things that we discussed in the panel last week too is about finding the efficiencies, all things being equal, just improving service, cutting our costs, reducing our waste, just reducing the food offering, which I don't see as being an issue, because I think guests will be very understanding of what we are able to provide them with. And I think the key is just being flexible, a little bit more flexible in terms of allergies, the various what would you call them, like the food preferences, dietary preferences. Possibly also just being able to maximize on the items that might have a larger uptake. So not thinking about the restaurant, but then maybe just more coffees, pastries, breakfast to go. So possibly set up mobile stations. At least in a hotel, we have the benefit of space where we can possibly do that. So that may be an option to try and generate a little bit more revenue and provide another option for the guests that wouldn't increase our cost that much.
No, I understand that.
Can I just interject for a second? I think for hotels, it might be feasible because you have other sources of income, room revenue for a start. For restaurants, 50% occupancy, I think, is going to be a non-starter, and people who open and find that they achieve 50% are probably going to have to close fairly rapidly, especially when they find that they have to pick up more of the furlough costs, the 10%, 20% September and October. There's no way any restaurant really should be able to make a profit at that level, and also picking up costs of extra costs of staff, which they don't currently have.
Adam, your view on this? Because obviously, your point of view, this is quite obviously important, as you obviously are the external partner for many people.
Yeah, I think this is where we have to think very creatively about how we cater for both the residents and the passing trade or non-resident stroke locals. For us, we know that in certainly one of the hotels we're about to reopen in, they're opening on a pretty low base in terms of the occupancy, which we've looked at for the next umpteen weeks, and it is gradually growing. But again, that's how long's that piece of string, because they don't actually know if all of those occupancy will actually end up staying there. What we've tried to do is create a number of additional packages that go over and beyond that of just being in a restaurant within a hotel. So we're trying to create packages that for those that are staying in their rooms and they just want to be, for the want, locked in there and looked after, they can get everything they need from us, from a almost a mini bar box that's taken to the room through to, meals on a regular basis. And it goes back to one of the earlier points that we discussed in our forum, that, I think we have to be clever with our menu design, our meal usage, and we've got to be clever with our staffing as well. So we've got to make sure that is managed accordingly to sort of cut the cloth. But it's you've got to be creative. You've got to think out the box here. You've got to think a bit differently, and you've got to try and get as much of that additional revenue that there is out there as you possibly can, and encourage it. We're making good use of outside grounds so that we're opening up terraces and so forth, and making sure they're safe for the users, and that we're trying to adapt that so we can start getting some additional revenue. We've been quite lucky in one of the hotels because we're refurbishing it at the moment. So we've literally just helped them refurbish that within a COVID environment, which doesn't sound too pleasant, but actually it's actually made us think a bit differently about some features within normal restaurant designs, because you can actually create some very good looking spaces now that sort of meet the needs of that social distancing, but still give that social interaction and that experience. So we're trying to be, you know, a little bit more forward thinking.
But Karen, you sent me some very interesting stats yesterday, didn't you, about the amount of revenue lost by restaurants in the last 3 months by the National Restaurant Association out in the US, and how many restaurants are going to be closing. The feedback you're getting working with hoteliers, do you find that they're concerned by how the market's going to recover? The restaurant market's obviously going to have a problem, and is there an alliance that hoteliers can build with top chefs and restaurateurs?
Yes, I think that they can, and a lot of the deals that we've been working on, particularly with management contracts, the restaurant element is still a really important part of it, and a lot of attention is being given to the amount of money that's generated by the F&B element in a hotel. There is clearly a concern, but a lot of hoteliers are thinking, well, maybe there is a glimmer of light here, in that perhaps there will be more trust and confidence placed in hotel restaurants than in the average restaurant in the high street, because perhaps hoteliers might put more money and time and resources into making this a safe environment or a more exciting environment for the customer. So there is clearly concern, but definitely very much how can we partner up with the right kind of people who can deliver a service that the customer will want to partake of in these times.
No, that's my view. Michael, your thoughts on this? Will there be a migration to hotels?
I think certainly, I agree with Karen that I think many people, not all, will feel that they are slightly safer in a large hotel environment if they're going out to eat. The problem there, though, is that most hotels, certainly in London, have fine dining establishments, and they have partnerships with famous chefs and so forth. And that's a very limited market, and it may become even more limited because people may not be inclined to spend so much money. We don't know. I mean, there's talk about everybody having saved money during the lockdown, and that's, I think, to a degree true, and may be quite happy to splurge. But because there is just not a big enough choice of casual dining places within hotels, I think there's a gap there, and there's possibly an opportunity for hotels.
David, your view on this? Because obviously restaurants and high street, which is something you're very passionate about, are obviously going to take quite a big hit.
Yes, they are. I think I look at this from two perspectives. I think food means different things to different hotels, depending upon where they are and what type of hotel they are. You know, at one extreme, you might pick there's a 4-star hotel in London I know very well that's got 350 rooms and almost no F&B. And yet you can go to a country house hotel 35 miles away and find only 25, 30 rooms and a massive amount of F&B. And you know, in some, certainly in parts of the hotel sector, it seems to me that restaurants and food aren't necessarily just destinations, but they're getting close to it. You know, they are a main reason for going and staying. And it does seem to me that there is a lot of potential pent-up demand for people to get out of the city, to get away, to feel some space, to treat themselves and have a bit of a celebration of the fact that this has been a goddamn awful period. You know, I was really interested to watch the Park Dean Resorts, which is hardly a luxury experience, but Park Dean Resorts has this almost full order book now for August and September. That's a really good example of how staycation is going to become very big. And I know there's not, you know, there's a big F&B offer there, but I think people are desperate to get away. But on the other hand, there are lots of people, as Adam was saying, who are very agoraphobic now. And I think do not disturb behaviour in hotels is going to be a big thing as well. And packaged food, particularly, I think will have a part to play, not in the top end, but in other parts of the market. You know, we've been working with Gate Group, who are an airline caterer who've got tons of capacity for producing packaged food, and we're helping introduce them to hotel companies who need really high quality packaged food right now. So there's some really interesting stuff going on.
Sorry, after you, Michael.
No, I was about to say that I believe I read somewhere that people in the staycation market, quote unquote, are raising their prices rather significantly because they know people are not traveling abroad.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence of that, or am I mistaken on that?
Don't know.
But no one knows.
I haven't seen any bargains, shall we put it that way? I would agree that there is that sort of, I'm now going to treat myself element, and also there is quite a lot of loyalty to a lot of the hotels with nice restaurants that are reopening. But the ones that are emailing and saying we're now reopen, calling on all our loyal customers, I don't see any bargains being offered alongside that.
Well, in terms of changing, go back to you very quickly, changing services, will we see more ghost kitchens open up in hotels?
I'm sure that we will.
Yeah, I think I think Adam said it. We all have to think creatively right now, and you know, I think I said this actually in the conference, that many hotels have been built 20, 30, 40 years ago, and the physical infrastructure is not necessarily relevant to the market that we're certainly entering into now. So I think that footprint utilization is, people are going to have to think really carefully about how they use the spaces in their properties. And I do see that. Kitchens, I think, are a fantastic asset, which with the digital world that we have now, does give an opportunity for hotels to create new revenue streams through marketing channels like Deliveroo, for example, and actually use those kitchens in other ways than simply servicing their own customers.
Because Adam, the one thing which occurs to me, all those conference and banqueting kitchens are going to be empty for a while, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so, I think that this is where you know, the hotels themselves need to seriously think about a complete joined up approach, because it's not just about food and beverage that's in the restaurant or in the cafe bar or in the main lounge bar, because the majority of that food is being catered for somewhere within that hotel. As David said, you know, in some of these hotels that have huge expanse kitchens with lots of money that's been spent on them. But actually the changing norm will also be upstairs or downstairs within the events market. And there's got to be a whole joined up approach about how that is managed effectively, because it's not just the restaurant or the bar that will see social distancing. The events market will see social distancing, and how those events are then managed correctly, and how you then give excellent experiential food and beverage to those events as well has to be catered for in the right mindset.
I mean, the interesting thing I find in most feedback is that people seem to split one way or another. 50% of people are very worried about coming back into city environments, and 50% have no concern at all. I mean, how consumer behavior changes is going to be fascinating, isn't it?
It's going to be a big learning curve.
Yeah, totally.
Abigail, are you seeing any changes in the kind of people booking or consumer behaviors or their requests?
At the moment, we're not seeing bookings coming in. We're only seeing a lot of bookings going out. Most of them in groups. What we're doing on our end to be able to communicate out is just put together with all our international hotels one communication piece that we'll send out I think next week about the hygiene standards that we're taking, how we're going to protect them in-house. Yesterday I demoed a thermal scanning machine So that I think just layers of things that add a sense of security, I think, to the guests walking in is what's important, and then the communication with them before they arrive or at time of booking, that will help to alleviate some of their concerns. I think the majority of, or a lot of the hesitation or the anxiety with traveling into London would be probably how do they get to the hotel? Because like we said, the hotel could be seen as safe space because we will be adopting all these hygiene standards. It's, when they're on a plane, or train, car, what they're touching, and how they actually get there. So if there's something that we can do to help them, to help with their concerns, whether it's arranging for transport, I don't know, but with I think since we're opening with such a low occupancy, there is an opportunity to be able to provide that enhanced level of service possibly.
And are you seeing any differences between what's going on in New York and what's happening in London?
New York for us is about 1 month opening behind London. Right now they're in phase 1 of their opening, which is some shops or hotels fall under phase 3, which would be later on in July. And it's the same, I think, same booking pace as here in London. There's more cancellations coming into the city, whereas the reports that they're getting from there is that, you know, the secondary towns are opening up. Other hotel owners I've spoken to, they've opened their hotels. Some of them have been full, but they're in destination country destination markets instead of cities. So I think also because the attractions in the cities are not going to open for quite a while, how that will affect us is going to be something of a challenge. I think yesterday there was a rule that use that theater, so that's the West End, which is a key business source for us, is that's going to be gone for a while.
Do you plan to open as soon as you're allowed? Do you plan to open all your hotels, or you're going to take a wait and see attitude?
We're planning to open our London property August 1st. And then Heathrow mid-August, and New York will be September 1st. The properties in Asia are already open, but also with very low occupancy, very minimal staffing. We're just trying to open, and whatever business we can get, we'll try. But I think we have to try.
I mean, David, I think it was you a couple of weeks ago who was saying it's very hard to get the facts. Because actually, it is incredibly hard to work out what's right and wrong, isn't it? In terms of the economics, because even all the stories coming out of Europe are bouncing back. I'm finding actually the stats aren't quite as positive as sometimes the stories are.
Yeah. I think that's undoubtedly true, Chris. I think the truth is that I think the conversation we've had in the last 10 or 15 minutes dictates that consumers are not even sure themselves what their behaviours are going to be once everything opens up. So for us to be able to forecast that at this stage as an industry is almost impossible. And I run a business that works on supply chain. The same applies in the supply chain that feeds our sector. At the moment, the supply chain doesn't even know when our sector is actually going to open up again. Is it going to be July the 4th or isn't it? And you know, as we all know, there's beer to be brewed. There are vegetables in the ground. All this stuff doesn't just happen like that. And it's also happening in an environment where cash is extremely tight. Nobody in the whole value chain, bar a few of the big players, have really got a very solid balance sheet. So I think we're in for some bumpy times all round in the period between now and Christmas, particularly around.
You know, sorry. All of us are business people, and we're all used to making decisions with imperfect information. I have never been in a position where not only do I have imperfect information, I have no information on which to base the decision. None at all. We tried to work it out. I've got a red hot finance director. We cannot work out what to do in our restaurants. It's impossible even intuition doesn't help here. It just doesn't. It's the most bizarre situation I've ever been in, where I find it, I'm usually quick to make decisions, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. Here, I play with all the variables, and it's worse than playing three-dimensional chess. You just can't work out what to do.
There's a survey came out last week in Scotland about what do people want to do as they come out. And interestingly, haircuts came first, which I do understand. But restaurants, the really shocking piece is restaurants and pubs came 16th.
In Scotland.
That's in Scotland, yeah. So my question really is it going to be really, is it going to be that hard to re-engage people? Do you think? Because actually, I'm dying to go out to a meal again.
Yeah, me too.
Adam, your view?
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I'm fed up with cooking. I've just done I've done nothing more than cook.
And so is my wife, I might add. However, I've got to say, you know, she's not going to be seeing this, but I prefer her meals to most restaurant meals. So
I don't prefer my cooking. I tell you.
I think it's very, it's, you know, it goes back to what Michael said. You know, at the moment we're in this, our mindset is focused on creating this safe environment, and none of us know what that bubble is going to look like. We can open the doors in the first hotel believing we've done everything absolutely right, and we've got every safe measure we've got sorted with varying different packages to make sure that guests are looked after. And who knows, they could check in and walk straight to the bar and want their first drink. I think the first week will be very telltale for all of us. I think we'll understand a little bit more from that first week. I mean, I've sat on various different and listened to various different webinars over the last 2 weeks, and it's exactly as we just discussed. I mean, the information is different on every single one that you listen to, and everyone's got a certain sort of different opinion. The core element throughout is that everyone's trying to get to the same sort of start gate and the same goal. We just don't know. I'd like to think, as I would for my business, that the gates are going to open and people are going to come in and, you know, embrace the changes that have happened and start using the facilities as best they can and as best as they feel that they can, and that starts growing and growing and growing. It's definitely going to be a different norm that we've all known, and we've got to try and work through that.
One of the big challenges at the moment is about staffing, isn't it? Because you've had staffing on furlough now for 14 weeks many times.
Yeah.
And it's probably for another 3 or 4 weeks. How do you re-engage people and retrain them and get the new service levels up to play?
Well, it's been, you know, I think it's twofold. So we've had to keep the staff engaged from a company level that says, you know, the sort of just keeping them understanding what's going on without through the whole furlough thing, without sort of encroaching too much of their time, because you physically you're not allowed to. But behind the scenes, we've, you know, come up with a whole list of new sort of training modules that will just help them through the first few weeks when they gradually come back, because again, some will come back before others, and you know, it will be trade determining in terms of how many of those you can bring back. We've you know, I'm not going to lie, we've certainly seen throughout that you've got to keep everyone on a pretty good level. I think that the furlough scheme sounds great, but it does affect different people in different ways, and you know, you've got to try and keep them engaged in terms of where they need to be. Otherwise, you could end up, you know, when the green light happens, you could end up actually losing some very good people because they may not wish to come back to what they left 3 months ago. And again, that's another sort of question mark at the moment. We don't know.
I've already had some people resign and go back to Latvia and Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
They're just fed up.
Yeah.
Abigail, your views on this one? Because I know you're quite passionate about this, about re-engaging people, aren't you?
No, I think, you know, similar to what Adam and Michael just said, between Brexit and coronavirus, I think some people are just like, you know what, we're out of here. You know, for us, I think it's keeping in mind and understanding also that the staff have been been away from work and structure and procedure for quite a few weeks. And when you're in this if you do something, they say if you do something for 30 days you can make it a habit. At this stage they've been being at home and having their own structure for 3 months, and how do you then adjust their lifestyle to get up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, go to work, get them back on public transport, which I think most people will still be very terrified of going on public transport, get them to trust that they can come back to work, and also how do you address their concerns over there has been trauma, so how do we address that with them? How do we be more understanding of performance at work, with new policies, the rules and procedures? There's so many things that have changed and so many uncertainties, and then also a bit like we're talking, like Michael said, you can't. If everything was uncertain before, especially customer behavior in food and beverage, even now it's even more uncertain what customer behavior is going to be in hotels and also in restaurants, and how we train the staff to deal with new issues or demands, especially your front-facing staff who are used to working through conflict and difficult guests, happy guests, anything. But now they would probably face a new range of questions and demands, and how do we train them to be prepared for that? And then there's probably also the fear of the second wave, if a potential second wave happens, and what then do we do? I think us as the leaders, as the heads, we have an idea of what would happen, but filter down through the chain, and if communication is not good enough, then they will probably end up being demotivated, not want to come back to work, just think, am I going to go on furlough again? All that uncertainty, I think, creates a lot of anxiety, and that's probably a key issue that we would have to work through with staff as we start to bring them back slowly.
I mean, I think that's one of the most fascinating things psychologically, isn't it? I found that a lot of people on furlough and just generally around the place were ultra relaxed during April and May, and actually secretly probably quite enjoyed furlough. And that's not, and a lot of young families were probably better off as well.
You're right. I've been sending out a bi-monthly survey to everyone in the staff, asking how they are. Half of them respond, and they respond with, I'm good, I'm just a bit bored, but fine. And they've all been like enjoying the time off. They're like, I've never spent this much time with my children. I don't know if I like it or not. But yeah,
I know that some restaurants have kept their staff engaged by involving them in community outreach projects, which I think has been a very effective way of keeping the staff motivated and engaged. So I know, for example, the Richard Corrigan has had his staff in at Bentley's providing breakfasts on a regular basis to the local community, which I think has been an amazing thing to do. And the staff that I know have been involved in that have been extremely happy to do that. But I also think the point about travel that Abigail made, I think how people will feel about travelling to and from work is one of the biggest issues. Yeah, and even if you manage to go in on your bicycle, get to work, there's still the concern about the people that you're interacting with and how they've got there and what they've been exposed to in terms of the virus.
You're right, that's one of the fascinating things. But actually, when you look at what happened with the shops reopening this week, people don't seem so concerned at all.
No.
I mean, it does seem this complete split. Either people breach social distancing completely, have no fear, or people the opposite are very fear.
I'm not sure the people we saw in front of Primark were our sort of customers.
No.
It was John Lewis as well. It was John Lewis as well. Sorry.
Someone, I think it was David, made a comment earlier about fine dining. Are we going to see a big hit on the fine dining side of things? And you do hear people saying, well, no one is going to want to spend a lot of money in this environment that we're in now on fine dining. But for every person who says that, there is someone who says, I really feel like a treat. So it's absolutely what Michael was saying as well, that, you know, for and you, Chris, you know, it really seems to be 50-50, and it's really, really difficult to gauge.
Well, apparently there's this concept that you heard called revenge shopping. Have you heard this?
Yes.
It's going out to spend in revenge against the virus, which seems an interesting psychology. Could backfire quite quickly, that one, when you get the bill.
The virus is trembling in its boots, I can tell.
Michael, we've heard some really bad stories about restaurants on High Street. How bad do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, sorry to be the harbinger of gloom and doom, but I think it's going to be pretty catastrophic for many people. I think many will open, find they run out of cash if the business doesn't bounce back immediately, and we don't have this fabled V-shaped recovery. Because we don't know how many staff to make redundant, we don't know how many staff to actually bring back, because we don't know what the level of business is likely to be, and we don't even know what the social distancing requirements for tables is likely to be. I think it's going to be much more, it's already horrific, frankly, that as we know, lots of restaurants have decided not to open again because they can't work out whether it's worthwhile opening or not. Once the green light is given and the parameters are set out, people will just have to close their eyes and jump off the cliff, and many will find that they hit the rocks really very quicker than they expected, and close again. I think it's going to be awful, just awful. I can't give you a percentage. Well, I can. I'd say I think 50% of independents will certainly be closing, unless there is this V-shaped recovery, and I have no idea if there will be.
And how about the casual dining sector? Is that going to change?
No, I think it's going to be the same for them as well. You know, if you're right now, you know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, pubs being able to have the tables outside, and Westminster's doing quite a lot for allowing tables and chairs outside for drinkers. What worries me a little bit, and it hasn't been talked about, is the disadvantage that restaurants who don't have any outside space are having to face, because whilst these pubs can serve food at these tables and suddenly expand the number of tables that have been available, we don't. Those restaurants who don't have outside seating or parking garages or gardens or anything like that are going to be disadvantaged, I think, and people are more likely to go to restaurants with outside spaces for safety reasons, provided the weather is okay. So this worries me a little bit. Not that there's anything anybody can do about that.
Well, I think more than that, Michael. I know of quite a number of businesses that are planning to open in the parks, pop up in public spaces, specifically designed to exploit the opportunity for people saying, "I want to eat outside, I want to drink outside." So there's in addition to what you just described, there's even more competition potentially coming down the street.
Yeah. If you're lucky enough to have a park near your business.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I'm afraid, Chris, it's awful, and I think we'll be in for a major shock with major amounts of redundancies in our business, sadly.
Landlords and leases, how's that going to change?
What is?
Landlords and leases, how they approach this, because it's obviously going to impact on them, isn't it?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the hotel market very well, but maybe Abigal can answer this. Would you say most hotels own their own properties, or do a majority, let's say in the UK, do the majority lease properties from landlords?
Karen can probably answer that too.
Karen?
Well, most of the big brands do not own property. They usually manage, or it's a franchised operation. But a number of them do have leases. And it will be very interesting to see how the balance of power settles with those leases, whether variations are going to need to be made. That applies, I think, equally to both leases and management contracts. But if you look at a number of the leases, there are often fixed rental levels and then turnover elements. And I think a lot of tenants will be having discussions with their landlords about the sustainability of the rental levels that they've signed up to. Also the length of term of their leases. I was talking to an overseas investor, a European restaurant operator who's still looking to open a restaurant in a very prestigious part of London. And he was being asked to sign a 20-year lease. And he said to me, is this normal in the UK? I said, why would you do this? He said, well, it feels wrong to me. I said, just as well you're getting advice, because who would ever do that? You know, if you're going to do that, you need a break every 5 years. And I think break clauses are going to become very, very important, even more so.
It should be one-way break clauses, i.e. the tenant. That's what needs to happen. And no more upward only. I mean, that has to be.
That's the big issue as well. It's been upward only rent reviews forever and ever. And is it now the time where, you know, there really needs to be a discussion about this sort of thing? Because, you know, otherwise we'll continue with the situation where the landlord will present the institutional type lease and the tenant will struggle, I think, to be able to sign up to that. So if we're to keep the sector going, I think there does need to be a radical think of some of those traditional concepts.
Abigail, your view?
No, actually, I completely agree. It's something I hadn't thought about, to re-look at the leases that even we currently have with our third-party tenants, restaurant tenants in the hotel. It's a great point. I think it would definitely be necessary, because I mean, we always see the tenants as partners. It has to win for both sides, and the affordability of the rent in central London at this stage of the business that's going to come in. You said, you know, Michael said, if with social distancing, if you have to open a 50% occupancy of restaurant, it's not really going to be sustainable. So how can we also help our tenants survive as well as ourselves? I think that is a great point.
Adam, your views?
Yeah, look, it's a tough call, and I've been, you know, having those negotiations personally over the last month. I mean, it's you can see it from both sides of the fence. There's the landlord that, you know, also has to pay a set fee for the space that they've got, and they've borrowed, you know, heavily off it to make sure they can do A, B, and C. They've then subleased it out to people like myself, and I've got a rent to pay, and all part of that is a part of the jigsaw. I think it's about understanding a fairness in terms of that jigsaw, so that fairness, I think all of us, none of us are saying, you know, no one wants to pay. I think everyone is saying, how do we just, you know, as businesses in a crisis like we've never ever seen before, how do you just, you know, for the sake of making sure this works for everybody, come up with a plan that can get through the next 12 to 18 months, and then maybe review it. And I agree with Karen and Michael, you know, the 5 years and all the rest of it, you know, has to come into play. Now, interestingly, you know, this week alone, and it is very interesting, you know, I think 3 weeks ago, I was offered a premise in London with an extraordinarily high rent. And when I went back to them, I said, you know, if you're sure you got the figure right, just before I really signed this. And they were saying, absolutely. And if anything, you know, the landlord wants more. And, you know, I just said, well, it's not for us then. We'll move on. And then this week, I've seen other landlords from other parts of the UK that have sent me some stuff now, and actually they're creating pretty good incentive packages now to get people in, because I think it probably goes back to what Michael was alluding to earlier. I think they're starting to wake up a little bit and smell the coffee, that in 3, 6, 12 months time, there's going to be a hell of a lot of vacant premises and sites and venues, and even venues within hotels that are open and boarded up, because people won't be able to survive creating a brand or putting their own brand into that space if the rent is, you know, extraordinarily high.
Interesting story.
We've had situations where, very sad situations where You've had a relatively new company taking a lease of a restaurant, and the landlord, of course, asks for a rent deposit, 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of landlords have actually, in this current situation, taken the money out of the rent deposit to pay the rent. And who's going to willingly, you know, it's just very difficult. You can see on the one hand that the landlord wants their security, they've been accustomed to asking for rent deposits, but a tenant looking at taking a new lease like that and looking into the future can't see if there's going to be a recurrence of COVID. They'll think, if I put more money into a rent deposit, will it vanish in a few months' time?
Interesting story that I sit on a board of a restaurant in Shoreditch, and we have a landlord who has historically been quite difficult, but now faced with the reality, he's come up with a very interesting solution, which we haven't fully accepted yet, to take equity in the business instead of rent. And you know, that's an interesting approach, and we're considering, or it's being considered.
I think this is fantastic because I mean, we all live in and work in a value chain, you know, and that value chain eventually puts stuff in front of customers to give us money. And there are a lot of rather old-fashioned concepts about that value chain, you know, the buying and selling and who makes what out of it. And yeah, Michael and I have both been around a bit longer than someone on this call, and you know, you can see the pattern that is emerging now. I've seen it before. We've got CVAs going on now in the restaurant sector, which are mostly driven because there are inflexible landlords, and people want out of those leases because they can't work with those landlords for the future. And then there will be, as Michael rightly predicted, there'll be another spate of CVAs and a lot of M&A activity later this year, into next year. And I do think this is a unique opportunity to rethink a lot of the ways that relationships happen in value chains, not just around leases, but across the whole piece. And I think leases is actually potentially a really good spur for some really great thinking about changing that.
And there are lots to think about with hotel management contracts as well, and that applies to the whole management contract and the F&B element of it as well. Yeah,
because it is about risk and reward, and really great value chains carry the sharing of risk and reward right through the value chain, rather than just dumping it on one person in one place.
So David, is this just a natural correction anyway happening, do you think? Because it's like anything, isn't it? Pendulums swing and balances get out of sync.
I'd rather think this is more of an evolution. I think actually, even looking at procurement and supply chain, there's been so many advances, particularly driven out of technology and the way in which technology supports relationships, that a lot of those things have changed for the positive in recent years. And I would think that the way we make our value chains work will continue to evolve.
I'm glad
positively.
I'm glad you touched on technology, because technology is going to sit at the heart of the recovery, isn't it?
Yes, providing we can afford to invest is the key thing. Because I think one of the big problems at the moment is cash, and I've lived through quite a few recessions now. And I know how difficult it is to be sat in front of your cash flow forecast, trying to be creative around how you deliver cash to yourself 3, 4, 5 months down the stream. And it kind of feels counterintuitive to invest in technology at a time when that's when you're under that kind of pressure. On the other hand, with cloud-based systems now, you can pay for those systems on the drip. And I think my own view is that there are really good opportunities to invest selectively in technology that helps take away low value activity out of restaurant operations. And I think there are plenty of examples of that out there now. And I think because what we need to do, and it comes back to your point about people, Chris, I think we have a unique opportunity now to try and build a different model for our people, you know, to pay more, to retain more, to develop more, But at the same time, we have to make ourselves more efficient, and I think technology is a big part of that.
Adam?
Totally agree. I think there is, we've spent the last sort of 2 months reviewing some of the technology that we use to date. We've come up with 3 or 4 little mini projects that we've signed off as a board, and we're putting in place that will help ease the burden of ordering from the room, everything done on a mobile phone, no need to look at anything. And to be fair, the people we've worked with, and we've worked with some really nice local small companies, they're desperate for that sort of work, whereas before they probably would have farmed out at pretty heavy price. They're now reducing their price and going for a little bit of volume, and we've managed to sort of pick up 2 or 3 very useful contacts that we've spearheaded. And I think it's tech will become part of the solution. I don't think it's going to become it shouldn't become the total solution. If I pick up on David's point, and also I think this is a bigger thing for me. I think this is the first time in our industry, and we all say it enough times when we all go off and talk and sit around different tables and have a drink and so on and so forth. But I really do believe this is the first time, and at our ripe old ages as well, we've got to bring hospitality together. There is a chain here from start to finish about everything that we do, that everybody has a piece to play in that, from whether it's how we deal with the landlords, to how we buy, to the service, to the elements, the actual staff themselves, the clients. There's a whole piece there that for once, I think we are all starting to think differently. I think we've got to start bringing a lot of that thinking together now and come up with a bit of a uniformed and a bit of a uniformed, joined up approach. And just my last bit on that is, I don't think you'll ever turn, this is just my opinion, I don't think you'll ever turn all landlords. I think landlords have had a pretty good part of their own process for many, many years, and they've said this is what we're doing and we're not changing it. But I do think there's also some other landlords out there that are thinking slightly differently today, that in terms of, what do I need to do to make sure this space is let in a fair manner? Because they could end up with egg on their face.
Well, aren't landlords going to have to change with the amount of vacant space going to be around?
There'll be a lot of empty space this time next year.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm assuming. Sorry.
It'd be interesting to get Karen's view on that. But I think it's from what I'm being told with some of the guys that I speak to on a regular basis each day, some of the spaces that even we sort of looked at last year are re-emerging again, in the current climate under a new deal. And they're already telling us, just hold fire because there could be about another 3 or 4 coming down the pipeline. So that tells me there's people talking to them about wanting to get out or move away because they can't renegotiate. And that's the sad thing. If they could just renegotiate correctly and properly, they wouldn't have half these empty spaces, and it would lead to a bit of a fairer plate. But Karen, what's your view on that?
Well, I think one of the problems is you have a batch of institutional landlords, and they will be the most reluctant to let things go. And they often are the people who have prestige locations in cities like London. And I think a lot of them will feel that this is still a prestige location, no matter what's been going on. And I need to maintain my value here. People will still want to come. I'm not entirely sure that will be sustainable, even in respect of prestige locations. But I think, I hope that this will be an opportunity, and there'll be a necessity for many landlords to sit back and think, as you say, if we want these communities to flourish and these businesses to be sustainable in the longer term, we're going to have more of a partnership going with our tenants. And I've always said, if I've ever been advising a tenant and they say, look at these are really tough terms, and you have to somehow convince a landlord that unless you have a partnership, this will never succeed. There's no point having a really tough clause if the tenant has to go to the landlord 4 weeks later and say, do you know what, I really can't live with this. That doesn't do anybody any favours. So I think I'm hoping there'll be a bit of a readjustment. And just very quickly on the tech point, I think there's a lot of, there will be a necessity at the moment to invest in certain tech just to comply with the legal requirements. There was an interesting piece this morning on Radio 4 about pubs reopening in Scotland, and there was one pub owner saying, well, we put all the plastic shields in and we've invested in infrared taps. Even that has a cost associated with it. And that made me think, goodness me, even to do basic things like this, it's costing the average tenant a lot of money. And again, how are they going to survive?
No, it is. It is. I'm conscious of time. Listening to you, I'm assuming that you're not very positive about the V-shaped recovery. So your forecast, each of you, your forecast of recovery, Abigail?
Go to someone else first. Let me think about it.
Okay. Michael?
Well, you've probably heard me before, but I think I don't think we'll get back to normal for, I think, unless there's a major vaccine breakthrough, I don't think we'll get back to normal for at least 12 months. As far as I'm prepared to look into the future.
David?
Well, just to provide an alternative view, I think I think what I've been reading about the vaccine is encouraging. AstraZeneca are in production of a vaccine, the Oxford vaccine now, and I appreciate they've got deep pockets, so they can afford to take that risk because if they've got first market mover advantage and all that. But it's in stage 3 of testing. If it gets through that, we could be in a position where we have a vaccine certainly in the middle of the autumn. And if that happens, I think that's a game changer. So being a glass half full person, I'd say that's what I'm hoping, putting my hopes on, because that will make a difference.
Mm.
You're positive. You're not normally as positive, David.
I just try to put a bit of balance in. That's all.
Karen, your view?
I was thinking I'm probably more of a glass half empty kind of person, but for some reason I think I have great faith in the resilience of human nature. And my feeling from what I see around me is that people are on balance desperate to get back to normal life, and I'm hopeful that desire to get back and socialize and support local business, hopefully with a more socially minded touch and attitude that they had before, will really push the recovery through more quickly. Could take up to a year, but I'm hoping that it will be quicker than that. And certainly the people, the hoteliers that we're advising about reopening, they're all saying, right, this is going to be difficult, but we want to be out of the blocks first. We want to be ready. We want to be ready to go. We're sprucing up all our offerings, we're repainting, doing what we can, spending the money we can, giving this and that a bit of a cat lick, because we want to be out there first to attract people in. So there's a lot of hope.
Oh, that's good. Adam?
I'm ever the optimist, so I'd like to think that it's going to happen very quickly, and just, I think there's going to be a process to this. It's not going to happen overnight, and I take David's point as well. I think I'd like to be thinking that when the vaccine happens, that the sort of green light goes on. But I'll leave you on this note, because being the optimist and thinking that everything's going to happen tomorrow, I take great faith on watching the news this morning that Greggs have reopened everywhere and people were actually queuing outside Greggs to get in. Now, if they're going to queue to get inside Greggs, yeah, we've got to have some optimism here and some creativity and get cracking with this.
They've missed their vegan sausage rolls.
Abigail, for you to finish on.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree with all of your points. I think
but you can't agree with all of us.
Well, no, yeah. I'm trying to be like the glass is full and take it from all different
Good by you, Michael.
So I think we'll first see like some sort of spike, because like like Karen and Adam said, we want to go out and support the local businesses, especially in restaurants. So, and we're all keen to go out. And so there will be that initial spike, but eventually also I think after a couple of weeks of that, there will be a dip again as people get back into normal routine, realize that then we have new habits of whether it's saving money, people who've been on furlough or have been unemployed throughout are a bit more cash strapped. So after the excitement of everyone's like, hoorah, go out, and then there's going to be, okay, let's take it easy because we want to make our money last for a little while. So I think it'll probably be a bit of a wait. Yeah, and 12 months, I would say.
Oh, look, can I say thank you to all? That's been a great discussion. The hours zoomed by yet again. So thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.